All right, let's get this thing going. I'm a recovered alcoholic. My name's Tony. Welcome to Thursday Night Big Book Study Workshop of the program of Recovery. Thanks for joining us. Thanks you for making this happen. How we open this meeting is with the Serenity Prayer. What do we need for a good meeting? God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. I'm a recovered alcoholic. My name's Tony. Sobriety date is April 8, 1989. We put on this Big Book workshop to help people go through the program of recovery as outlined by the first 100 men and women. Where we're at is in Bill's story. You can get caught up. We put these online. So if you're kind of falling behind or not kind of getting the gist of what we're doing, you can kind of access those things. So we're going to go through the whole series. We're going to hit the highlights. It's your job to read right during the week, and then we'll hit the highlights of what hopefully you're getting out of the material, right? And if you're new, we got worksheets, we got big books back there if anybody needs some to see if we're telling you the truth or not, right? So we go with what the book talks about. So in Bill's story, we're going to kind of start at 13. We kind of left off there last week. And Bill's story is an example of what alcoholism looks like in somebody's life. It's a carryover from the doctor's opinion. In the doctor's opinion, he gave two examples of witnessing this miracle that started to take place within his facility, right? He kind of regarded Bill as the type he come to regard as hopeless. And in the doctor's opinion, in the first opening statement, he kind of talks about Bill as being the type he come to regard as hopeless. And then in his third treatment, he acquired certain ideas that this change happened, and this doctor witnessed it. So where we're at tonight is Ebby just finished showing up to his place, and it was the second time he'd been to treatment, and Bill's still drinking. Ebby has a solution. Bill is yet to find a solution to his problem. He wants to change, but he can't change, right? He knows what the problem is now. He knows he suffers from this condition of the mind that makes it almost virtually impossible for him to stop drinking. So he's really perplexed, right? So what the beauty is, as he's sitting and talking with Ebby, he sees that his ideas of miracles are revised right then and there, right? He sees that there's a possible solution for him, right? So what we understand technically is Ebby's doing step 12, but he's talking to Bill about step 2. A lot of people, when they talk about step 2, they talk about their relationship with God. That's not what step 2 is. Step 2 is about acquiring a psychic change or spiritual experience that the doctor reiterated had to take place for people of this type, right? The type that he come to regard as hopeless. Until this change happened, they kept on relapsing. We'll understand that as step 1. Right, the step 1 promise is that we keep on drinking even though we don't want to drink, right? And we've seen that in Bill's story, right? We've seen that Bill wanted to stay sober, but there's something happening beyond his ability to control, change, or alter, right? There was something that would take place within his life, and he'd find himself drinking. Remember that? Somebody pushed the drink, it was away, he took it. Was I crazy? And then he renewed his hope even again, right? He tried harder. Anybody here? I'm going to try harder this time. Then he found himself drinking again. And then he went to treatment for the second time, and he hit bottom. He has the gift of desperation. He has acceptance. He has all these things we hear in meetings as the beginning of the starting of a new story. But unless you engage in a solution, you're still stuck with the old story. Does that kind of make sense? So he's seen that this thing was obtainable, right? And the basis of it was willing to believe that there was a power greater than himself. Nothing more was required. So he was willing to believe that there was something that he's seen in his friend, and he's seen it was obtainable if he did what his friend did, right? Right. So the basis of that is being willing to believe that there was a power greater than himself. We see he made his decision, right? Would I have it? Of course I would, right? And so we see that he goes to treatment for the third time on page 13. And he confirms his decision, right? So you hear a lot of people say, I do step 3 every day. That's not the design of step 3. The design of step 3 is making the decision to engage in a course of action to bring about the change that we talked about in step 2, right? Step 2 is the solution to step 1. So all the way up through this thing, up to page 44, we cover steps 1 and 2. we build on those ideas. And every time we talk about step 2, or the book talks about step 2, it talks about acquiring the psychic change or spiritual experience. Does that kind of make sense? And the course of action they took. Because if we can get the change by just doing 3 steps, how many people would do 4? Right? So it's very critical that we understand the outline of this book, right? Like, there's a lot of different ideas within our fellowship that's not supported with the literature, right? And so what's really cool is that we see this formula that Bill acquired, that he put into practice, and how his life began to change, right? He had a solution for the human dilemma, right? He's not treating alcoholism. What he's treating is his human condition, and byproduct of that, he has the problem of alcoholism is removed, right? So as long as the problem of alcohol is present, will he be able to deal with the human condition? Not for any given period of time. How many people is here has relapsed? So there you go, right? Like, how many people thought they were doing great and celebrated with a 24-hour chip, right? So I don't know what happened, right? Anybody have conversations in the mirror? What's the matter with you? Not the one on the table. I'm talking about the one on the wall, right? The one on the table is, oh, yeah. The one on the wall is, oh, no, right? So you're having a heart-to-heart, right? Anybody ever have a heart-to-heart? You're looking in the mirror asking yourself what's the matter with you? How many people's done that here? What's funny is we wait for an answer. Like a part of you is going, well, I'm glad you asked, right? And it doesn't, right? It doesn't say that, because we really perplexed, because the human desire for change and combating this illness is 2 different things, right? If it was a behavioral problem, then you could start giving yourself shit for why you relapse. But if it's an illness, that's a byproduct, right? You hear a lot of people have shame, guilt, and remorse from relapsing. That's because they haven't done step 1 yet. If you actually do step 1, you realize that that's inevitably going to happen unless you acquire a psychic change or spiritual experience. That's where we're kind of going with this. So Bill's story is what he was like. We've seen what he was like, right? And how well did Bill do fixing Bill with Bill? So we've seen if he was in the fellowship of AA, would his story be different? It wouldn't be, because it seemed like coming here, just because you come here, you're surrounded by a lot of people who are helpful, a lot of well-meaning, helpful people. Yeah, you feel good about coming to a meeting, maybe not at first. You think it's a jail sentence, right? I'm going, hey, it's the worst thing that ever happened to me. Then, anybody? Hey, it's the worst thing that ever happened to me. How are these people so happy, right? Ebby's thrilled, Bill's not so thrilled. Remember that part? Bill's engaged with his own thinking, right? And so what happens is, we give you another way of looking at things, right? And so what we're looking at is this new experience that Bill's having. So there.
I think what's interesting before we get to at the top of page 13 is the conversation between Evie and Bill. Is it about, I'm going to go to the hospital for the 3rd time so that I can get sober? Or am I going to go to the hospital for the 3rd time to be separated from alcohol for the final time, go through a process that's going to allow me to enter into a relationship with something greater than myself? 2 different stories, right? And each time Bill went to the hospital prior, sobriety was the goal. And it seems that this conversation is a little different, right? And he's going to the hospital for the 3rd time with not sobriety in mind, but this relationship. And it says, at the hospital, I was separated from alcohol for the last time. Treatment seemed wise, for I showed signs of delirium tremens. There I humbly offered myself to God as I then understood him. It's interesting, right? This is the first time he's not, the belladonna treatment, the hydrotherapy, all of these sort of self-reliance little things that we can apply to our shitty situation, which, might make us feel better. We're like an entirely different conversation and hospital visit now, right? To do with me as he would. I placed myself unreservedly under his care and direction. I admitted for the first time that of myself I was nothing, that without him I was lost. I ruthlessly faced my sins and became willing to have my newfound friend take them away root and branch.
So which is really cool there, where he says, where he talks about as I then understood him. How did he understand him? He understood him as a power greater than himself, that if he got access to it, it'd create this change. Where did he get that understanding from? Well, he got it from his friend. He didn't come up with that idea, did he? So most people, when they sit in meetings, they're coming up with their own idea, step 2. He's not going with his idea. He's going with his friend's idea of the course of action that he engaged in to create this change. He's going to engage in the same course of action, yes? So who's taking him through this course of action?
His friend.
His friend. So the difference the third time in treatment is that he has a viable solution that his friend's going to walk him through. And that's the same thing that has to happen in the fellowship of AA. We'll continue to relapse until somebody has a viable solution to walk us through, right? Our job is to find you, right? Because you're not looking for people like us. You're looking for people that make sense to you, right? And those of us who have this change don't make sense to you. We're like, oh no, there's that person again, right? Huh? Okay, go ahead.
My schoolmate visited me, so still in the hospital, right? And I fully acquainted him with my problems and deficiencies. We made a list of people I had hurt or toward whom I felt resentment. I expressed my entire willingness to approach these individuals admitting my wrong. Never was I to be critical of them. I was to write all such matters to my utmost ability. Is it starting to sound familiar?
So he's going through a course of action, right? This is now he's going through it, yes? And as the result of going through it, watch what happens.
I was to test my thinking by the new God consciousness within. Common sense would thus become uncommon sense. I was to sit quietly when in doubt, asking only for direction and strengthen to meet my problems as he would have me.
So what step would that be to us? 11. Yeah, it's not step 10. There's no step 10. It's step 11, right? It's about getting this relationship and formulating an experience with it, right? Now he's in counsel with something other than himself, which most of us don't formulate in step 10. We're still in counsel with ourselves. Can I find somebody to talk to about me? Now there's this big thing happening. I got step 10 buddies. Not only do I get to think about myself all day, I get to talk about myself all night with another person who talks about them all night. So it's a formula that was passed on to Ebby. It's a formula that brought about a change. You can do the history and all that kind of later, right? So it's incorporated. You hear people say, oh, they don't understand us out there. You ever hear that? All our program of recovery is from those people out there that was more concerned with us than we were with ourselves.
The easiest answer to your question is yes. It is also the seed to what our 12 steps would eventually become. Never was I to pray for myself, except as my requests bore on my usefulness to others. Then only might I expect to receive, but that would be in great measure. Interesting enough that nowhere in this paragraph does it say I was to take my problems to a group of other people with problems and we could all talk about our problems together, right? Because if we think about Alcoholics Anonymous at this point in time, it doesn't exist yet. There are no meetings to go to. There are no people to share our experience with, right? This is just one drunk talking to another drunk. And this is where the idea was initially born.
And you see it's always happening afterwards. The experience is having happened after. Most people are talking about the experience before it even happens. See how the mind works? Because if you have this experience before doing it, then you don't need to do it, do you? Right? I do step 3 every day. Well, how? Can I find someone else to talk about? So what happens is he's having a course of action, and then he's having a new experience, a new relationship, a new idea. He's in counsel with something other than himself. You think his life would start to improve then? 100%.
It's interesting to break down that word relationship even in the concept of this particular paragraph, right? Like we take that word for granted. I have relationships with people, but to think about it, it's how do I relate to this thing, right? My relationship with this power. How do I relate to this power? I am to test my thinking, by this new consciousness. My common sense would thus become uncommon sense. I was to sit quietly when in doubt, not ramble endlessly about what I was doubtful about, right?
So you want to underline that consciousness. It's a theme that they keep going back to, where they move from the cheese factory, the thinking factory, right? The maze, into something that's happening inside of you, right? And if you kind of really reflect back on your life, it's the thing inside of you that has you seeking something other for your life. Because if it was just your thinking, the rambling of your thinking, then we'd all be in trouble, right? But something inside says maybe there's a different possibility. And when Bill was sitting there talking to Abby, he felt something inside take a shift. His ideas of miracles were revised right then and there, and he felt hope, right? So anybody ever feel despair here? And when you feel hope, you notice the shift happens inside, your energy shifts, right? And that's what happens. So it happens in here, right? It's something happens in here, the consciousness. And we've all tapped into that now and then. In your darkest hour, there's always been something said, phone this person or phone that person, or you reached out to the unit or something, that moment. Anybody have that moment? Yeah. And then there's something or somebody or something starts to take place, and we have an opportunity for change, but we don't follow through on it because we start feeling better before we understand what the problem is. And the problem with feeling better is, right, you think you're getting better. Right? So if I'm feeling better, then I really don't need to do this. How many people remember the first time they came back? I'll do anything. Anything. Ooh. A week later, fuck, that was close. Well, is there a 12 and 12 study I can join? No, go ahead. Maybe just read acceptance every day. Okay,
my friend promised when these things were done, I would enter upon a new relationship with my Creator, that I would have the elements of a way of living which answered all my problems. Belief in the power of God, plus enough willingness, honesty, and humility to establish and maintain the new order of things were the essential requirements.
So they're going to build on that. Willingness, honesty, and humility. That's the ingredients, and we're going to show you how to incorporate that or how to pursue that and how to kind of, what Bill's having this experience, you're going to be able to see when you're experiencing that and when you're not. Right? So when you're experiencing something other than that, he has a recipe to go back to the shift, back to where the change is, instead of staying in the maze of his mind. He's able to move past that, tap into this power through this recipe that's given, and have a different experience. Does that kind of make sense? And the rest of the book's going to be designed about that. So he's talking about the course of action, which as the reader, we're looking at step 2. He's talking about now an experience of step 12. Does that kind of make sense? Because the confirmation of step 1 is what? Another drink, right? So when we look back, I see this has been taking place all along. So step 2, the psychic change or spiritual experience, what's the confirmation of the idea presented in step 2?
Coming to believe.
How about step 12? Having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps. So where did we get that idea? Was in step 2. Right? And so we make a decision like he did to do the course of action to have the experience. So when we talk about step 2, what we're talking about is a course of action to bring about the psychic change or spiritual experience. Where did we first get this idea that this experience has to happen for us to have a different experience in our lives? Who was the first one that made this observation for people like us? The doctor. Remember we built on these ideas. They're building blocks. So the doctor was the first one to kind of explain until such an experience happens, there's very little of the recovery. This is repeated over and over. But once a psychic change has occurred, right, the very same person who seemed doomed, right, so now he's talking about what he witnessed in Bill.
Think about it in these terms. It's the agreement we made when we started from the beginning of the book this time, right? That we were going to set aside all we thought we knew, everything we've ever heard, right? And we were just going to have an experience with this information. So if this is our only experience up until this point, we've been presented with the idea of what it is to be seemingly hopeless, to be in a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. The doctor has elaborated on his observations of his patients that seem to be in this state, right? He explained to us what the effects of alcohol do physically to an alcoholic, and that he observed that we have this really interesting tendency to repeat it over and over and over again, even though the consequences keep getting worse and worse and worse, right? And he explained that the whole the only people he saw recover from this state were ones that underwent this entire psychic change, right? This spiritual experience. And then he said we could rely entirely on what these people had to say about themselves. Now, we're in the next chapter in Bill's story where we get to see those symptoms of alcoholism active in somebody's life, right? Rather than trying to relate them to ourselves, we're having a look at a case study. This is what this seemingly hopeless state of mind and body looks like. This is what happens when this solution is applied to that state. Does that make sense?
And we're seeing the process, because all he said in the doctor's opinion was, the first guy says he accepted the plan outlined in his book, and then the change happened. And then the second guy is they talk about he became sold, right? On what's being presented here. So both of them made a decision to do the course of action and had this change. Now we're looking at what that course of action is.
We haven't been through the whole idea that's being presented in this book. We haven't even started yet, right? We're still gathering information. Make sense? Okay. Simple but not easy. A price had to be paid. It meant destruction of self-centeredness. We're still on page 14. I must turn in all things to the Father of Light who presides over us all. These were revolutionary and drastic proposals, but the moment I fully accepted them, the effect was electric.
What step is that? Will we understand? What step would that be of our understanding? Sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God, praying only for knowledge of His will for us and the power to carry that out. Right? 11. So 11. So it's all about the relationship. He's not talking about checking in with himself. All things. That means he's in constant conversation. So the more conversation he's engaged with this power, seeking counsel and getting access to it, the more his life will improve. Right? The moment he stops doing that and starts seeking counsel with himself, will his life start to turn to shit. And
it says here at the bottom of 14, my friend had emphasized the absolute necessity of demonstrating these principles in all my affairs. We'll elaborate on that later on in the book, right? He goes into great detail about it even in page 15, right? That this simple faith that he had acquired, right, as a result of this process was not enough, right? This faith without works is repeated over and over throughout the book, right? Action must be taken constantly, right, to be of service to those around us. He says over on page 15, my wife and I abandon ourselves with enthusiasm to the idea of helping other alcoholics to a solution of their problems. It was fortunate for my old business associates remained skeptical for a year and a half, during which I found little work. That sounds very much like early sobriety, right? It's shaky, it's a little bumpy, it's hard to, make a living, it's hard to show up, you know what I mean? Like he's not saying I went through this process and my life was perfect and I never had to return to these principles again, right?
And just back, one of the key symptoms or elements that we see as people working with people, right? You don't see it because you need to experience it. You won't be able to tune into it. But when you're working with somebody, one of the key elements that happen is you start thinking of other people that might benefit from this thing. You want to start working with other people. Everybody that I've worked with or been in group with who's caught on to this thing, they start working with other people right away, and their lives take off, right? And those who don't get this thing, they go still working on themselves, right? They're plagued with depression, right? They don't have a solution to the human dilemma. Bill, while he lied in the hospital, he thought how he might benefit others. So he's had this experience, yes? Right? So he's living in 11. He has this experience. The doctor witnesses it, saying, hey, you better hang on to this thing. He even sees it. Now he has a recipe. Yes? So this is where we're getting into.
It says, I was not too well at the time and was plagued by waves of self-pity and resentment.
Is that alcoholism or the human condition? Human condition.
Is that pretty apparent in early recovery? Right? Like, self-pity and resentment don't just suddenly disappear. They're still very much there. This sometimes nearly drove me back to drink, but I soon found that when all other measures failed, work with another alcoholic would save the day.
And this is where people get surprised is like, if you're perplexed with the human dilemma and you don't have a solution for it, you'll start thinking of weird shit. You think, should I go gambling? Should I go have some sex? Maybe involve somebody else? I don't know. Is there something, go eat? Is there something I can do to make me feel better? Anybody?
Anything to shift the internal condition, right?
But you get worse, right? You're doing things that you don't want to do. You're not doing things that you want to do, and the things you're engaged in is causing more problems.
Let's find out what Bill does instead. Many times I have gone to my old hospital in despair. He doesn't go to the casino. He doesn't go to his Tinder app. Right? He doesn't go to the fridge and eat or whatever other kind of thing that he might engage in order to just shift whatever discomfort he is feeling in that moment.
Doesn't go to a newcomers meeting.
He, for the purposes of a date. Many times I have gone to my old hospital in despair. On talking to a man there, I would be amazingly lifted up and set on my feet. This is a really counterintuitive experience, especially in early sobriety.
So, because a lot of people have mistaken the id, like your crazy thinking, right? Like, how many people have crazy thinking here? Like, and so to look at it from a different perspective, so the idea would come, like I'm feeling like life on me, and the brain would say, have a drink. And it said, that's stupid. So what he has, he's recovered enough to see it's not the insanity, it's this idea that he's able to shake. So it's like having a job and you really need it. But and then you have this overwhelming feeling to quit. Anybody ever quit a job and then after go, oh my God, what am I doing? So these ideas that drive you, right? And then you're at a job, say, I really need this job. So you find a way to shift your thinking to stay in the job. Does that kind of make sense? This is a little different because now he's going to the recipe to create a shift. He can't create the shift, so he's going to go look for a new person. So if you look at people who are really involved in the fellowship of AA, in service and helping others, is because this is the recipe for longevity. Like I'm coming up to 35 years sober. You think I don't have better things to do on a Thursday night? It's my anniversary today, 15 years to a beautiful wife, right? Yeah. But she knows this is very important, not only for my life, but our life, right? Because she sees what happens in my life when I'm doing this. And she sees what happens when I stop doing this. Tony starts showing up. And she's like, did you want to phone Alex? Maybe give Joanne a call. I'm not that bad. No. But you see, because life will still get on you, right? And it doesn't make common sense will become uncommon sense. I have problems. What do you mean go find somebody to work with? How is that going to help me? And then you do it, and then you get charged from the inside. It's like, wow, there's something to this. But it's hard to explain unless you experience it. When you experience this, wow, this is the juice. This is it, right? 35 years, I couldn't think of a better place to be in my life doing this. Come right from work, right? Sitting close to Joanne, just, she's so gracious. She doesn't say nothing, but her head's always turned that way, right?
That's okay. Me, gracious.
Gracious.
But what he closes the chapter out by saying is exactly what Tony is describing to you in one simple sentence. Faith had to work 24 hours a day in and through us or we perish. And it's interesting because we have a home group every day in this room at noon. And we were reading the board out today. And every member of the Way Out group is taking a cake in the next month. And there's a few of them up there. Not a single one of them isn't heavily involved in service. These are people that show up on a daily basis, right, to provide service to something other than themselves. And this is what they're talking about, right? Over in the next chapter, chapter 2, there is a solution, page 17.
Okay, before we start with that, you hear people say, read Bill's story and try to find yourself, right? How many people's heard that? Well, they used to say that all the time, right? That's not the purpose of Bill's story. The good part about the book is it'll tell you the purpose of something, give you an example of it, and they'll tell you the conclusion of it. So we just finished Bill's story. Now they're going to tell us the purpose why we did Bill's story. Does that kind of make sense? So let's look at the first paragraph.
We of Alcoholics Anonymous know thousands of men and women who were once just as hopeless as Bill. Nearly all have recovered.
Recovered. They don't pull no punches. right? They're no longer suffering from alcoholism. They're not cured of the human condition. They have a way of life that answers all their problems. So now we have something that we could apply to us for a different experience. And as time goes on, the old us becomes less and less and less. Right? And then you just get used to the new life, and you can't even imagine the way you used to be living the old life. That's why we work with new people. It reminds like, damn. And then we get you feel a bit of humility because what we got was something through a course of action. And the gift of being able to help somebody else, watch them recover. Like I know a lot of you here, right? I know a lot of your struggles and where you come from. And then to watch the transition happen in your life is pretty phenomenal. How? By doing the same thing that we do, right? Our common welfare should come first. Personal recovery depends upon AA unity. What's the unity? We have one way we endorse. What's the one way we endorse? Is the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. That's the program.
It's the only thing we endorse.
But if you listen to the fellowship, they have a lot of stuff going on in there. You know, the stuff that infiltrates the fellowship, people think it's a good idea. Drop the rock, pick up the rock. Now you're smoking the rock. It's like we hear all these things that come through our fellowship, and they sound good because the doctor talked about we've tried other methods, right? But invariably, they got drunk again, right? So here, this is a tried, tested, and true.
They sound good because they provide a little bit of temporary relief. And it's not real, right? It's not a change sufficient enough to combat what we're up against.
But we're looking for evangelical sobriety instead of sobriety.
It goes through the center chapter here describing that they're average Americans from all political, economic, social, and religious backgrounds. And it says here we are people that would not normally mix, right?
That's funny. I had to get that explained to me because me too. I didn't mix either. So that's why sponsorship comes in. That's not what they're talking about. I thought, I don't mix either, right? I drink it straight. That's not what they mean, Tony.
At the bottom of the paragraph, they say the feeling of having shared in a common peril is one element in the powerful cement which binds us. If you don't know what common peril means, it's this common problem, right? That we only have minimal information about, right? This problem of the allergy and the inability to have right thinking around that first drink, which they're going to expand quite a bit on in the next couple of chapters. But for now, we understand that these people, right, because we're trying to get things from their perspective, not our own, that these people, one thing that bound them together in the beginning was this common problem, right? This inability to leave it alone, no matter how great the necessity or wish.
That's what brings us here. The mindset that gets you here won't keep you here.
And they're going to say, but that in itself would never have held us together as we are now joined. The tremendous fact for every one of us is that we have discovered a common solution.
Okay, so do they all agree on what the solution is? Yes. Do they all agree on it's a collective understanding?
Well, they go on to say we have a way out on which we can absolutely agree. Like, that's really definite language, right? Like, how often do you see a group of alcoholics absolutely agree on anything? Who's been to their business meeting recently, right? And upon which we can join in brotherly and harmonious action. There's that word again, right? It's not a matter of sitting around in a room patting themselves on the back for having experienced the solution, right? That word solution is always followed up with some sort of action word.
So what they're saying is they all had the same problem, yes? And they all have the same solution, right? And it wasn't their solution. You hear people say, I'm doing my steps. Oh, boy. Right? We're not doing our step. We're doing their program of recovery laid out for us that we're going to incorporate within our lives so we become a part of the collective. The common solution, what's the common solution? Well, the common solution is they all came to believe in a power greater than themselves that could create this change. Yes? And they all took the same course of action to have the same experience. Right. The same experience as the psychic change or spiritual experience. Yes? Yeah. Unless they had this experience, what was their fate? They were going to die an alcoholic death. Yes? they would continue to relapse. And that's where we're going to expand on Bill's story on all the highlights here, right?
This is the great news this book carries to those who suffer from alcoholism. Over on page 18, where do we want to go?
Right, this volume. We hope this volume.
Yeah. We hope this volume will inform and comfort those who are or may be affected. There are many. Highly competent psychiatrists who have dealt with us have found it sometimes impossible to persuade an alcoholic to discuss the situation without reserve. How many of you have visited a doctor? And the doctor says, what's the problem? And you describe every problem but your drinking, right?
How many people sat in front of a drink saying there's something seriously wrong with my life? So, and this goes back to what the doctor talked about, like their alcoholic life seemed the only normal one. We create a scenario or a story in our mind that's our story. It doesn't represent exactly what's happening in our life, but we're comfortable with the delusion that we've created that it's not the same understanding of our lives as the people around us. You ever notice the people around you have a different view of your story than you do?
Oh, yeah.
And you're wondering why they're so out of sorts every time you go back drinking? Like, what's your problem? Oh, what do you mean, what's my problem? Or you get 2 weeks sober and they're still asking you to do a breathalyzer? Like,
In addition to what they're saying here about discussing it without reserve is the stigma attached to it, right? Because at this point, we're probably dealing with a person, and you may yourself still be under the impression that this is something you were choosing to do because you were a terrible person, and the last person you want to disclose it to is anyone, right? I don't want to discuss my drinking with me because you're going to make me feel like a piece of shit about it, because perhaps maybe I am, right? Because I don't fully understand alcoholism at this point.
yeah, it's baffling how many people within our own fellowship still think it's a choice to drink or not.
Sure is not.
But you wouldn't understand that unless you go through this. That's what they're getting at here. This next statement kind of hits that, right? That there's certain things that need to happen for us to understand what we're suffering from in order for us to approach it differently than a behavioral problem.
And they went into this paragraph by saying that the hope is that this will inform and comfort, right? So the information that we're going to receive will inform us more than what we had before, right? We'll have more facts about the condition than we had before, but also those facts might actually serve to comfort us, right? Rather than to provide more stigma.
And what's interesting is that when we give this copy to family, friends, and employers, doctors, and people, they get a different scope on what alcoholism is, and they learn a certain terminology. They understand what their employee, their husband, their kids are suffering from, because they realize it's not a behavior, they actually have an illness, right? So if you ever read to the employers, to the wives, the family afterwards, they all engage in a different view on alcoholism than is like Al-Anon. When people go to Al-Anon, they talk about it. They don't have a behavioral problem, they actually have an illness. So we start looking at people differently.
When we start talking about these individuals and approaching them in a way where we start to understand that if they had the capacity to make a different choice, they would have long ago, right? That it's not because these people didn't care about their families or their jobs or their financial obligations or their purpose in life. It was because they were up against something more powerful than them. The ex-problem drinker who has found the solution, who is properly armed with the facts about himself.
What solution? Any solution? This solution as outlined where? In the first portion. Very specific, right? Who's armed with facts about himself. I mean, I understand the symptoms of alcoholism. I understand why I've relapsed, or I understand why my sponsee is relapsing. It's not personal to me. I understand what they're dealing with. They don't have a full picture of it, so I need to help them have a step one experience. Once they have a step one experience, which is different than admitting you have a problem. Most of us admit we have a problem. That's not the step one experience. Because when you have a step one experience, you realize something has you don't have it. Right?
So the ex-problem drinker who has found the solution, who is properly armed with the facts about himself, can generally win the entire confidence of another alcoholic in a few hours. Or something happens when two people, right, one who has a solution to a problem and one who still has the problem are having a conversation about that problem and that solution.
Where was an example of that so far? Evie and Bill. Bill knew that he had the same problem he had, but he was having a different experience than he was. So he was kind of perplexed a bit by, like, how come you're having a different experience than me? Then he was more open to what was being presented because he couldn't create the change that he's seen in his friend. So pretty cool, right? When you kind of look at it that way.
Until such an understanding is reached, little or nothing can be accomplished. That's a really absolute statement, right? Like, think about that for a moment. How many people have tried to bring you a solution? How many people who don't have this problem have tried to bring you a solution? Were you listening to anything they had to say? I mean, even in your most desperate moments when you're like, fine, if you want me to shake a chicken foot and do a seance, I will do it, right? Like, that's how willing I am to try to find a solution to this. But you're apprehensive. You're not talking to somebody that's been behind this gate, unable to escape, right?
So when you look at it, Bill was of that type. He's tried many times treatment, everything at his disposal to fix his problem, but he was unable to do it. The people who were in the treatment centers, right, the doctor back then, there were certain people beyond his scope of helping, yes?
The leading doctor. The guy in the United States that you went to see if you had a drinking problem, right? He was not able to provide a solution to Bill.
So I spent 11 years in and out doing everything that was suggested to me. Made sense, because why did it make sense? Because I didn't understand alcoholism, right? So when these guys conned me into a big book study, they actually conned me into it. I didn't see the need of doing it, right? Cheese and cracker weren't even on the same plate. Like, I was pretty ill. I'm vomiting green bile, my liver's sticking out. I'm getting a little bit jaundiced. And I still I'm in 4, 12, and 12 studies, doing acceptance, doing surrender, doing step 3 every day. Why am I doing all that? Because I don't understand the problem. But once I understood the problem, I understood there was only one solution for me that I couldn't obtain on my own. Same like Bill, that I had to have this psychic change or spiritual experience, or my fate was I was going to die an alcoholic death. April 8, 1989, 1:30 in the morning, I'm drinking Last Call, and I remember doing the third step prayer with the idea that I was going to die an alcoholic death. That nothing worked for me, that I was beyond anything. Why? Because I didn't have anything sufficient enough to create a change after 11 years of in and out of the fellowship of AA. And then somebody approached me with whom the problem had been solved, and then took me through this, and I've never looked back. So how many people relapsed and said, I never really did this the last time? You actually inform us that you never did this the last time. We know you didn't do it. How do you know? How do you know I didn't do it the last time? Here's your chip. Right? Welcome back. So, like, we used to do this. How many people here has relapsed as the result of doing this course of action and maintaining it? How many people has relapsed as the result of not doing this course of action? Oh, everybody's hand goes. See, it's kind of interesting, eh? So that's what they're talking about here, right?
So back in 2014, after almost 8 years of hanging out in AA, and a few years of hanging out in this big book study and still relapsing, right? Because you can hang out in a big book study and you can catch on to the lingo and you can listen to the experience of others, but you can do that without actually having this experience yourself, right? And I would spend most of my time, we're talking about the one in Vancouver right now, in the back row arguing with this guy in my head, right?
Nobody's ever done that here, right? No one
listening. But then he said something really interesting. He said, I've never seen anybody go through this process, have this experience, that's maintained it, that's ever relapsed. And I thought, challenge accepted. Right? Because, like, if the wind blew the wrong way, I relapsed. So, I think I might have been a little drunk at that meeting.
I like how she says a little drunk, slurring, a little drunk. How did you get here? I drove. No, not that drunk.
But that was the message of depth and weight that got through, right? Because nothing had worked. And I had tried everything. We spent money we didn't have, right? Going to programs, gaining therapy, signing on for this, signing on for that. There were so many people invested in saving my life, I couldn't count them all, right? And nothing was working. And when he said that, I thought, okay, fine. I did. I literally thought, challenge accepted. And here I am 9.5 years later. Right?
And same with Carolyn. I'm going to blow her out. When they dropped her off at the Big Book study, her home group, the people in her home group said, "We can. I know a place I can help you." They brought her to the Big Book study. She's in a sling, black eye, just coming out of a relapse. Showed up at the Big Book study, belligerent. I mean, almost made her look like a saint, but not quite. And she went through this. She went through it in the beginning, kicking and screaming, arguing, but she was willing to conform to some of the ideas being presented. She went through the course of action, and now here's 23 years later. And there's story after story. We all have the same story until we were approached with those with whom the problem had been solved. So you could sit and meet. A lot of people sit in meetings. This is where we're going to go here. A lot of people sit in meetings. They don't understand alcoholism. So it makes sense if I read acceptance every day, I could create the change. Or if I surrender every day, if I. Right? And you hear people, we stay sober no matter what. You ever hear that stuff? And mainline speakers talk about that. And then you're sitting there going, I seem to be getting drunk no matter what. Right? I'm drinking, and after I'm drinking, it's what am I doing? Right? And then the allergy take 11 years of good enough reasons for things to get it. I mean, horrific stuff. Horrific. Right? But nothing ever happened sufficient enough here to keep me here. And I'd go back to those things, right? Living in AA. 11 years. And I tried everything, right? So here, they talk about 19 of those carrying this message, having this change. If we keep on the way we're going,
there is little doubt that much good will result, but the surface of the problem would hardly be scratched. Those of us who live in large cities are overcome by the reflection that close by hundreds are dropping into oblivion every day.
So look at this. That's the same within our fellowship. People coming here looking for a solution, and they're not getting it. We see the memorials on the wall. We see because the message, if AA, the biggest problem in AA today, this is what I see, is sponsorship, right? If everybody was sponsoring people through this course of action, you think the recovery rate would be different. Think about it. You think the recovery rate was different if somebody 12-stepped you through this course of action and you engaged in it right off the hop. 100%, right? But we get offered other methods, usually involved in self. Just don't drink. Read page 417. I've watched people read page 417, acceptance, give you this idea that you can do this, that you just don't drink no matter what, 90 and 90, more meetings. Anybody hear that stuff? And if it worked, then we would change how it works, wouldn't we? It would be first page, you have a problem, second page would be acceptance.
So as chronic relapsers, we try to implement these suggestions, right, as a way to solve the problem we're suffering in. And over on page 20, this is what it looks like when we do that.
Oh, no, we need to finish this.
Many could recover if they had the opportunity we have enjoyed. How then shall we present that which have been so freely given to us?
So many could recover if they have the opportunity we have enjoyed. What's the opportunity we have enjoyed?
Recovery. Power greater than
Specifically, this course of action. When Ebby presented this course of action to Bill, he's coming from a place of having had this problem. Right? Mm-hmm. And through a course of action, he was having a different experience. Bill went through the same course of action as Ebby, yes? Mm-hmm. He had a different experience. He leaves the hospital. He's still plagued with the human problem, but he has a solution for it now, yes? Mm-hmm. He was a year and a half depressed. When all this stuff happened, what would he go do? Go home and do a 10 and write about it and go to 15 discussion meetings and talk about acceptance, how it's not working for him? No, he would go find somebody to work with. You see what we're saying here?
Instead of implying that course of action, right, we hear these suggestions in our contemporary fellowship, right, these just don't pick up the first drink, think before you drink, all of, put the plug in the jug, right? And over on page 20, you get these responses now inside the fellowship. in this book, back when it was written, they're talking about people in the community at large. But I hear some of these comments in our fellowship. How many times people have said to us, I can take it or leave it alone, why can't he? Why don't you drink like a gentleman or quit? That fellow can't handle his liquor. Why don't you try beer and wine? Lay off the hard stuff. His willpower must be weak. That's one I hear inside the fellowship. He could stop if he wanted to. She's such a sweet girl. I should think he'd stop for her sake. The doctor told him if he ever drank again, it would kill him. But there he is, all lit up again. How many times have you watched that happen? Somebody's coming back. People, maybe it's a chronic relapser. Maybe somebody's had multiple relapses even in the same week, right? They're coming back to the same meeting. Well, they just don't want it enough, right? They don't want to imply themselves enough, right? Clearly, they just don't want to, put in the work, do the work.
And you hear people say that. I do step 1 every day. What does that do? It's like crapping your pants and admitting it every day. It doesn't change nothing. You get used to the smell, but the people around you not digging it. Sorry. Go ahead.
Here they go on to say that these are commonplace observations on drinkers, right? Which we hear all the time. Back of them is a world of ignorance and misunderstanding. Of what? Of the problem, right? Anybody making these kinds of comments doesn't understand alcoholism.
Oh.
And these kinds of comments can come from people suffering from alcoholism.
Thanks for going out for me.
Entirely possible to be suffering the symptoms of this disease and not understand it.
Thanks for doing more research. You hear that stuff? That's statements of ignorance because you're not making the decision to go out. You may think you are, but you're not because you've just before that made a solemn oath never to do it again. And then you're doing it again. So you have to come up with some reason why you're doing it again. And if you don't understand alcoholism, you think you're making a decision to do that. And then you're going to start feeling like more shit all the time, right? But if you understand it as an illness, then it gives you a different perspective. I need to do something else than apply me to me. Meetings are helpful, fellowship's nice, but I need to engage in this because my fate is sealed.
They're going to go on to describe some different types of drinkers, and it's probably important and beneficial to really kind of understand what it is they're talking about, right? Because you should know what kind of drinker you are.
Well, let's answer the questions. Beside your book, put yes or no as we go through this. Ready?
Moderate drinkers have little trouble in giving up liquor entirely if they have good reason for it.
How many people's had good reason?
Some of those good reasons might be kids.
So are you able to leave it alone? No. So you're not that then. Put a no.
Right? Jobs, relationships, important engagements that need to be met, right? Then we have a certain type of hard drinker. He may have the habit badly enough to gradually impair him physically and mentally.
He looks like an alcoholic, he sounds like an alcoholic, acts like an alcoholic, but there's a qualifier that makes him not like us.
It may cause him to die a few years before his time if a sufficiently strong reason, ill health, falling in love, change of environment, or the warding of a doctor become operative. This man can also stop or moderate.
So how many people has had strong warning? Operative, that's, I mean it this time. Last 10 times I was joking, but this time I mean it. Anybody been there? Mean it. So did you drink again? Yeah. Shit, that's not you. Put a no. See the qualifier here? Nope, I was hoping that was me. I've been just waiting for a good enough reason not to start again. Anybody? Okay.
What about the real alcoholic?
Damn, and you hear people lose their shit about that in the film. Real alcoholic. Because we could look like these other people. We're hoping we're like these other people. We're hoping we could stop on our own experience.
But
yes?
more importantly, our fellowship is made up of a lot of these people. Yep. And this is where these comments come from, right? Because we all know the guy at the home group who's been sober for over 30 years, right? Sits in his chair, shaking his head at everyone, right? Yeah. Because for 30 years, he's been able to show up to the meeting early, have a cup of coffee with the other long-timers, come into the meeting, grace everybody with his congenial presence.
I'm doing a checkup from the neck up. Sorry.
And he's been able to stay sober, right? Because he's been able to stop or moderate given good reason.
And they're looking at you like you have the problem. Like, AA is designed for relapsers. How many people find that surprising? It's not designed for people who can stay sober. So here's the other one. We have the biggest 12-step fellowship in the world. If you're involved in other 12-step fellowships and you weren't getting the support there, where would it be a good place to go hey out? No, they're not at Big Book studies. They're in 12 and 12 studies. So the fellowship's a great place. I know people that from, like, I knew some women from SA used to love coming to the fellowship here. She says it was like shooting fish in a barrel here. She said, I loved Alcoholics Anonymous. Who needs Tinder? She'd come here. So she'd come, well, there's a lot of people that could apply self to self. And so when they're 12-stepping or when they're sponsoring people, are they giving this solution or their solution? Their solution. And if you didn't know what this solution is, you're trying to get sober the way they did, but you don't have the same, they don't have the same problem as you do. Right? So what about the real? So read this over the next couple days.
It's worth saying that it's incredibly important. Like this program, right, was designed for those who cannot stay sober on their own. It's designed for relapsers, right? But this fellowship is welcome to all, right, who are concerned with a drinking problem, right? If you have a desire to stop drinking, you have a seat here. Why is that important? Because many of us who were pretty far gone, right, needed a place to be while we figured out if this thing applied to us or not, right? Like there's no requirement other than a desire to stop drinking. And I want to emphasize that. But those of us that require this program, right, we are the real alcoholics.
So when we went through the doctor's opinion, they gave us the first symptom in alcoholism, which was what? The allergy. They gave us a certain term, and then they built on that. All phenomenon of craving, these allergic types, it all stems from the doctor's opinion. It all stems from the allergy. The first symptom. Now we need to understand the second symptom in alcoholism. So over the next couple pages, they're going to introduce us to the second symptom in alcoholism, right? See if you could find what that is this week and what they call it. And next week we'll visit. That's the homework this week. Does that sound cool? Yeah. We have a 7th edition. We're self-supporting through our own contributions. That pays for the books people help themselves to and don't bring back. And we have the worksheets. We're going to get some more worksheets. We go through quite a bit. And live long and prosperous. And I had a lot of fun this week. So we're going to close with the serenity prayer. What do we need for a good life? God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Right on. Thanks, everybody online. Love you guys.